The mysterious signal. The vastness of space stretched on in every direction, empty and cold, with only the occasional flicker of distant stars to break the silence. For the crew of the Earth's last defense fleet, it was a lonely existence. The fleet had been dormant for years, hidden in the far reaches of space, far from prying eyes. Earth had changed since the fleet was last active. Technology had advanced, and the world was no longer in the constant fear of alien invaders. The fleet had been decommissioned, and its commanders scattered, living in peace. But all of that changed in an instant. It started as a simple signal, a whisper through the darkness of space. The message was faint, distorted by the vast distance it had traveled, but it was unmistakable. A distress call. The message wasn't from any known civilization, not from Earth or any of its allies. It was a plea for help, one that seemed to echo from the deepest corners of the galaxy. The signal was first detected by a small listening post, deep within Earth's territory. The technicians at the post were accustomed to picking up space anomalies, such as cosmic radiation or bursts of energy. But this was different. This signal was structured, deliberate, and it contained a clear distress message. They sent it up the chain of command, but no one knew what to make of it. The message was too weak, the origin too distant, and the request too vague. Days passed, and the signal grew louder. It was faint, but there was a pattern to it, a cry for help. The message seemed to be coming from the uncharted regions of the galaxy, from a sector that was mostly unexplored. No one had ventured that far out in generations. The signal was too strong to be ignored, yet too strange to be fully understood. At first, many thought it was a fluke, a glitch in the system, or some sort of cosmic interference. But as the signal continued, it became clear that something was out there, something that needed help. Earth's leaders were forced to make a decision. The old fleet, decommissioned and hidden away for years, was humanity's last line of defense. The fleet had been designed to protect Earth from the unknown, alien threats, cosmic disasters, anything that could threaten humanity's survival. But the fleet was old, the ships were outdated, and their crews long gone. Yet there was no other choice. The signal was too strong to ignore. Whoever, or whatever, had sent it was in desperate need of assistance. The fleet commanders were called together, their once dominant presence now reduced to whispers in the command rooms. They gathered, uncertain and apprehensive, unsure of what they would find. The ships were ready, but no one knew what awaited them. The signal had a strange quality to it, an urgency that seemed to grow with each passing minute. As the fleet commanders sat in the war room, discussing their options, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. They had to act quickly. The signal had been sent for a reason, and that reason could be the difference between life and death. Despite the uncertainty, the decision was made. The fleet would be activated. The ships, once silent and dormant, were ordered to awaken from their slumber. The command stations buzzed with life as crew members scrambled to prepare the fleet for its long journey. Weapons systems were checked, shields recalibrated, and navigation systems brought back online. The old ships, once seen as relics of a forgotten era, were now humanity's last hope. The fleet would head toward the coordinates provided by the mysterious signal. They had no idea what they would find when they arrived, but one thing was clear. The universe was about to test humanity once again. They were no longer just defending Earth. They were on a mission to uncover the truth behind the distress signal, and whatever they encountered along the way, they would have to face it head-on. As the fleet prepared to depart, the tension in the air was palpable. Each crew member knew that this journey could change everything. It could be a simple rescue mission, or it could be a fight for their lives. No one knew for sure, but they were ready. The mystery of the signal would soon be unraveled, and Earth's fleet was prepared to face whatever lay ahead, no matter the cost. With the fleet now in motion, Earth's commanders watched as their ships slowly disappeared into the darkness of space. The journey ahead would take days, maybe weeks. Time was not on their side. Every minute brought them closer to the unknown, and with it, the truth behind the signal. But for now, all they could do was wait and hope that they would find the answers they so desperately needed. The signal had been heard, the fleet had been awakened, and now, the true test was about to begin. As the Earth fleet drifted farther into the deep, uncharted expanse of space, a sense of unease settled over the crew. The hum of the engines was the only sound in the command room, and the deep blackness beyond the fleet's hull seemed to stretch on endlessly. The signal had led them this far, but what awaited them in the unknown was anyone's guess. The fleet was heading towards the coordinates, the final destination of that mysterious distress call, but they knew very little about who or what they would find. The fleet's commander, Admiral Ross, stood at the front of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the dark screen. His face was stoic, but his mind was racing. He'd been through countless battles, survived wars and skirmishes that had shaped him into a leader. But this mission felt different. This wasn't a threat they could see or predict. It was a cry for help from a distant unknown, a plea that had come from the farthest reaches of space. "How far are we from the source of the signal?" Admiral Ross asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The officer at the console, Lieutenant Clara, glanced up from her instruments, her expression tight. "We're approximately 2 days away, sir. The signal is still getting stronger as we approach. But there's something strange about it." "Strange?" The Admiral raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Lieutenant Clara turned her screen towards him. "It's the frequency. The signal structure is too perfect, too deliberate. It's almost as if it was designed to get our attention. But there's no source we can trace it back to. No known planet, no civilization. It's just there." Admiral Ross rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He had been expecting the unknown, but this wasn't just a distress signal from a nearby planet or a neighboring species. This was something bigger. The intensity of the signal wasn't just a call for help. It felt more like a message, an invitation. "We keep moving forward," he decided. "We'll find out what's waiting for us. Prepare the fleet for whatever we might encounter. This could be the most important mission Earth has faced in centuries." As the fleet continued its journey through the void, the silence was almost suffocating. The crew was on edge, unsure of what lay ahead. The usual banter and chatter that accompanied space travel were absent, replaced by a quiet tension that seemed to grow with each passing minute. Everyone knew that this was no ordinary mission. Earth's survival might not be at stake, but the secrets hidden in the depths of space certainly were. The crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something monumental. Meanwhile, the signal grew louder. It was a constant presence now, pulsing in the background like a heartbeat of the galaxy. The officers on the bridge took turns monitoring it, making sure it didn't suddenly change or flicker out. It was as if the signal itself was a living entity, guiding them deeper into the abyss. Admiral Ross sat in his command chair, his hands clenched together in thought. The mystery was consuming him, the unknown stretching out before them, just out of reach. It was an unknown that was calling them, pulling them toward the source. And he knew that there was no turning back. The fleet had already crossed into the realm of the unknown. Their mission was set, their course charted, and their purpose defined. The fleet's approach was cautious. Although the signal was getting stronger, there were no other signs of life, no indication of what might be waiting for them. The silence of space hung heavily in the air as they neared their destination. Each ship's sensors scanned the vast, empty expanse, searching for any sign of what lay beyond. But there was nothing. No planetary bodies, no ships, no asteroids. Just a blank void stretching endlessly in every direction. It was as if the coordinates had led them to the very edge of the universe, where even the stars themselves were afraid to venture. As the fleet neared the final coordinates, the signal reached its peak. It was a continuous, unbroken hum that filled every crevice of the ship. The crew members looked around, unable to escape the eerie sound that seemed to seep into their bones. It was a sound that made their hearts beat faster, a sound that hinted at something far greater than they could possibly comprehend. The fleet stopped just short of the signal's origin. The unknown stretched before them in every direction, a vast emptiness that seemed to swallow the very light around them. There was no planet, no object, nothing that could explain the signal, just a black void. But somehow, the signal was coming from somewhere inside it. "This is it," Admiral Ross said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Prepare to deploy reconnaissance drones. We need to find the source of that signal." As the drones launched into the dark expanse, the fleet remained still, waiting for any sign of what was out there. For now, all they could do was wait. The mystery was no closer to being solved, and yet the pull of the signal only grew stronger. There was something waiting. But what? In the dark corners of space, hidden from all view, something was watching. Something ancient, something powerful, something that had been waiting for the right moment to make its move, and the fleet was now in its sights. The crew had no way of knowing it yet, but they were no longer the hunters. They had just entered the most dangerous game of their lives. As the drones ventured further into the empty abyss, the crew watched in tense silence. The view screen flickered slightly, showing the cold, black expanse of space. The drones were equipped with the latest technology, capable of scanning for the slightest disturbance. And yet, the deeper they ventured into the void, the more they realized that there was nothing. The emptiness swallowed their signals, and the sensors revealed no hints of what they were hoping to find. But then, something changed. The drones began to pick up something faint, almost imperceptible, like a ripple in the fabric of space itself. It wasn't a physical object, but more like a disruption in the very essence of the surrounding space. It felt like a presence, an unnatural presence, one that could not be traced by conventional methods. Lieutenant Clara stared at the readings, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Commander, you need to see this. The drones are picking up some kind of energy signature. It's unlike anything we've encountered before." Admiral Ross stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the screens. The faint energy spike was growing stronger, but the drones still couldn't pinpoint its exact location. It was as if the very nature of space had shifted, and the source of the signal was now hidden, cloaked by forces beyond their understanding. "We're not alone," Ross muttered under his breath. His gut twisted as the realization hit him. Whatever was out there had been waiting for them, and it wasn't just a distress signal, it was a trap. He turned sharply to Lieutenant Clara. "What's the status of the fleet's shields?" "We're fully powered up, Admiral. Shields are at 100%. But whatever is out there, we don't know how it will react to us," she replied, her voice laced with uncertainty. Admiral Ross nodded. "Keep the fleet in formation. Let's not make any sudden moves. We need to stay alert. This could be more dangerous than we anticipated." As the drones advanced deeper into the void, the mysterious energy readings intensified, and the sense of unease grew with each passing second. The signal continued to pulse, drawing them closer to something. But the closer they got, the more the crew began to feel the weight of an impending doom. Something about this place felt wrong. The empty space seemed to press in on them, and the signal, once a simple distress call, now felt like a siren's song, leading them into a trap. Then, with a sudden jolt, the fleet's sensors went wild. A massive energy surge erupted from nowhere, flooding the entire fleet's instruments with static and interference. The signal disappeared entirely, replaced by a deep, low hum that rattled the ship's hull. The crew was thrown into chaos as alarms blared and screens flashed with warnings. "What the hell was that?" Lieutenant Clara shouted, gripping her console tightly. Ross stood frozen, his eyes wide with realization. They found us. The hum intensified, and suddenly, in a blur of motion, the fleet's weapon systems powered up on their own. It was as though some invisible force had taken control. Without warning, a massive pulse of energy shot out from the dark space ahead. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, streaking toward the fleet at an alarming speed. There was no time to dodge, no time to react. The blast collided with the lead ship, sending shockwaves through the entire fleet. The massive explosion sent debris flying in all directions, and the first ship of the fleet was consumed by the blast. The force of the explosion rippled outward, rocking the rest of the fleet with a force they had never felt before. "Damage report," Ross shouted, his voice a sharp command. The crew scrambled to assess the situation, but it was clear that the fleet was under attack. The unknown entity had revealed itself, and it was far more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. Lieutenant Clara turned to face him, her face pale. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the lead ship. Shields are holding for now, but the fleet is under heavy fire. We need to make evasive maneuvers. Now." "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Ross ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for sustained combat. We won't survive if we stay in this formation." The fleet scattered, dodging incoming blasts of energy as the unknown force continued to rain down destruction. The once orderly group of ships was now in disarray, each one trying to escape the unseen enemy's grasp. But no matter how fast they moved, the enemy's energy pulses seemed to follow them, always just a step behind. As the fleet fought to regain control, Ross couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing into the hands of whatever was out there. The enemy wasn't just attacking. They were testing them. Every move they made, every strategy they employed, seemed to be anticipated. The fleet's every attempt to escape was met with more fire, more chaos. It was as though the enemy knew their every move before they made it. "Admiral, we need to get out of here," Lieutenant Clara said, her voice shaking with fear. "We can't fight this thing with the resources we have left." Ross clenched his jaw. "We're not running, Clara. We fight. We're Earth's most dangerous fleet, and we will not back down. We find out what's attacking us, and we destroy it." But as he spoke those words, the fleet was hit with another powerful energy burst, and the ship trembled under the shockwave. The hum from the enemy's energy weapons seemed to grow louder, more menacing, as though it were feeding off the chaos it had created. For the first time in a long while, Ross questioned the strength of Earth's fleet. Whatever this enemy was, it was no ordinary force. They were facing something far older, far more powerful, and far more cunning than they had ever imagined. And the worst part, they still didn't know who or what they were really up against, but they were about to find out. The fleet's chaos continued to escalate as the unknown force relentlessly attacked, each blast more powerful than the last. Admiral Ross, standing firm in the center of the command deck, felt the tension in the air grow heavier. The crew was doing their best to keep the ships in formation, but the threat they were facing seemed to anticipate every move they made. The hum of the enemy's weapon reverberated through the fleet's hull, a constant reminder of the impending doom that hung over them. "Status report," Ross demanded, his voice cutting through the noise of alarms and frantic communications. "Shields are holding for now, Admiral," Lieutenant Clara responded, her voice strained. "But we've sustained significant damage. We're losing ships faster than we can repair them. The enemy's energy pulses are too powerful. We can't match them." The words hit Ross hard. He had never imagined a scenario where Earth's fleet would be outmatched, but here they were, struggling against an enemy they could barely comprehend. He had known this mission would be dangerous, but the sheer scale of the threat they were facing was something no one had expected. "What's our next move?" Ross asked, clenching his fists. He refused to believe that they would be defeated so easily. The fleet was Earth's strongest, and they had faced countless dangers before. They had always come out victorious. But this time was different. This time, they were up against something far more ancient and powerful. "We can't keep running forever, Admiral," Lieutenant Clara said. "We need to find a way to strike back, or we'll be wiped out. But the enemy is somehow controlling the battlefield. Our systems are being disrupted with every pulse they send out. We can't even get a lock on their position." Ross turned to the tactical display, watching as ships in the fleet continued to be picked off one by one. The once proud formation was in tatters, scattered across the dark expanse of space. The enemy's weaponry seemed to strike without warning, targeting their weakest points with brutal precision. "We need to regroup," Ross said after a moment, his mind racing. "Get the surviving ships together. We'll make a final push. We have to take the fight to them before they destroy us all." But even as he gave the orders, a sinking feeling filled his stomach. How could they fight something they couldn't even see? The enemy was clearly in control, manipulating the battlefield and using their own technology against them. It felt as though the universe itself had turned against them. The hum of the enemy's weapon grew louder, and suddenly, another powerful blast erupted from the void. This time, it was aimed directly at Ross's ship, the Sovereign, which had been acting as the fleet's command center. The impact threw the ship into a violent spin, sending the crew scrambling to hold on. "Brace for impact," Ross shouted, gripping the nearest console to steady himself. The blast hit with the force of 1,000 storms. The ship groaned as the shields faltered under the onslaught, and the hull shuddered from the impact. Sparks flew across the command deck, and the lights flickered. For a moment, everything seemed to go silent. The hum of the enemy's weapons stopped, and the ship was left drifting in space, vulnerable. "Report," Ross barked, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Shields are down to 20%, Admiral," Lieutenant Clara replied, her voice shaky. "We've lost several systems. Navigation, life support. We're barely functioning. The crew's injured, and we've lost communications with the rest of the fleet." Ross gritted his teeth. They were teetering on the edge of total destruction. If they didn't act fast, they would be the next ship to fall. "Where is the enemy?" Ross asked, scanning the view screen. But the vast emptiness of space offered no answers. There was no sign of the mysterious force that had been attacking them. No ships, no debris, just endless darkness. "It's like they've disappeared," Clara said. "But we know they're still out there. We just don't know where." A chilling realization swept over Ross. The enemy wasn't just using advanced technology. They were manipulating the very fabric of space itself. It was as though they could make themselves invisible, bending the rules of the universe to their will. It was the ultimate predator, one that didn't just hunt with weapons, but with the environment itself. As the seconds ticked by, Ross felt the weight of his decision press down on him. He had always prided himself on his ability to lead, but this was a situation unlike anything he had faced before. Earth's fleet was the most advanced military force in the galaxy. But now, in the face of an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't understand, all of their technological prowess seemed useless. Suddenly, the hum returned, this time even louder, like a warning. The energy pulses were coming faster now, and the enemy's presence was closing in on them again. Ross knew they didn't have much time. "Prepare the fleet for one final strike," Ross ordered. "We fight back, or we die trying." The command was given with all the authority he could muster, but deep down, he knew that their survival hinged on finding a way to outsmart an enemy that had already proven it could predict their every move. If they didn't find a way to turn the tide soon, the fleet would be obliterated, and Earth would be left vulnerable to an attack they couldn't even comprehend. The final battle had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. The unknown enemy had revealed its power, but Ross was determined to show them what humanity's willpower could achieve. As the fleet regrouped and prepared for the ultimate confrontation, the tension in the air was palpable. The enemy was out there, lurking in the shadows of space, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Admiral Ross and his fleet weren't backing down. The question now was simple: who would survive the battle? The hunters or the hunted? The silence of space was oppressive, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. The remnants of Earth's fleet moved cautiously, knowing that the enemy could strike at any moment. Admiral Ross stood on the command deck of the Sovereign, staring at the tactical screen, trying to make sense of the situation. Every minute that passed, they grew more vulnerable. Every ship that remained in the fleet was a small beacon of hope, but the vastness of the darkness around them seemed to swallow that hope whole. "We need to find them, Ross," Clara said, her voice grim. She stood next to him, looking at the flickering displays that barely showed the positions of the enemy ships. "We can't keep playing defense. If we don't figure out where they're hiding, they'll wipe us out before we even know what happened." Ross clenched his jaw, frustration boiling beneath his calm exterior. The enemy had proven to be nearly invisible, their attacks coming without warning. They had already lost too many ships. The rest of the fleet was scattered, trying to regroup, but with each passing moment, the situation seemed more dire. "I know, Clara," Ross muttered, rubbing his forehead, "but we don't even know what we're dealing with. They've outmaneuvered us at every turn. It's like they know our every move before we make it." The tactical display blinked for a second, showing a faint reading, an energy pulse, a signature of the enemy's presence. Ross's heart skipped a beat. This was the first sign they had gotten in hours. There it is," Clara shouted, pointing at the screen. "Their energy signature. It's faint, but it's there." The display showed a small, flashing dot in the vastness of space. It was the first clue they had received, a potential lead. Ross's mind raced as he weighed their options. "We're going after it," Ross ordered. "This is the break we've been waiting for. Clara, coordinate with the other ships. We need to converge on this position. No one goes in alone." Clara nodded, her fingers dancing over the console, issuing commands to the remaining fleet members. The remaining ships moved cautiously toward the energy signature. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Everyone knew that this could be a trap, but they had no choice. The enemy was waiting for them somewhere out in the dark, and if they didn't take action, they would be annihilated. The fleet closed in on the signal, each ship carefully navigating through the void, weapons primed, shields at full power. As they neared the point of origin, the hum of the enemy's weaponry suddenly reverberated through the fleet once again. The faint signal they had tracked shifted, becoming stronger, almost as if the enemy had been waiting for them to find it. "Brace for impact," Ross shouted, slamming his hand onto the console as the ship's systems warned of incoming fire. The attack came swiftly. The fleet was blindsided as a wave of energy pulses erupted from an unseen source. Ships rocked under the bombardment, shields flickering out before they had time to recharge. Ross's ship, the Sovereign, took a direct hit to its starboard side, throwing the crew into chaos. "Shields are down," Clara yelled, scrambling to maintain control of the systems. "We've lost communication with several ships. They're being destroyed one by one." The eerie silence returned once again, but this time, the threat felt more ominous. They were surrounded, but they couldn't see their attackers. The enemy was still hidden in the dark, using their superior technology to remain unseen. "Where are they?" Ross yelled, his voice raw with desperation. A voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible through the chaos. "Admiral, we've detected." The transmission cut off abruptly, and then static filled the air. Ross clenched his fists, his mind racing. They were out of time. The enemy wasn't just attacking, they were playing a game with them, testing their limits, pushing them to the edge. "We need to fight back now," Ross said, his voice hard. "Clara, do we have any chance of getting a lock on their position?" Clara hesitated for a moment, her fingers flying across the console. "Maybe. If we can use their own energy pulses against them, we might be able to track them." Ross turned toward the view screen, his face set in determination. He knew they were fighting an uphill battle, but humanity had always been at its strongest when it was pushed to the edge. If they had any hope of winning, they needed to think outside the box. They couldn't let fear control them. "Do it," he commanded. Clara worked quickly, rerouting the ship's systems to use the enemy's pulses to their advantage. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance they had left. She adjusted the sensors, filtering out the background noise. And soon, the ship's systems pinged with new data. "I got something," Clara said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and tension. "It's faint, but it's a direction. We might have found them." "Good," Ross said. "Set course and prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not just hunting them. We're going to make them pay." The Sovereign powered forward, its remaining systems pushed to their limits. The other ships followed closely behind, coordinating their attack as best as they could. As they closed in on the enemy's position, Ross could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The fate of the fleet, and possibly humanity itself, rested on their next move. The enemy was out there, still hidden in the dark, watching and waiting. But now, the tables had turned. Humanity was no longer the prey. They had fought back before, and they would do so again. This time, the enemy would learn the true meaning of what it meant to challenge humanity. As the fleet approached the enemy's location, Ross felt a surge of hope, a feeling he hadn't experienced in days. The battle was far from over, but it was about to get a whole lot more interesting. They were coming for the enemy, and this time, they wouldn't be easy to stop. The moment the fleet locked in on the enemy's location, a sense of urgency coursed through Admiral Ross. This was their chance, the one they had been desperately waiting for. But as the fleet advanced, the tension grew thick in the air. Every officer on the bridge of the Sovereign was glued to their stations, eyes flicking between the tactical screens, waiting for the inevitable strike from the enemy. The ship's hull vibrated with the hum of energy coursing through the weapons systems. Ross could feel his heart pounding as he leaned forward, hands clenched into fists. The enemy had proven to be elusive, but now that they had a fix on their position, there would be no turning back. "We're closing in," Clara said, her voice steady but laced with anxiety. She wasn't the only one feeling it. Every crew member on board could sense the weight of the moment. They knew that this was make or break. Ross nodded grimly, his gaze never leaving the view screen. The stars stretched out ahead of them, but there was no sign of the enemy. The silence of space was unnerving, making them feel exposed, vulnerable. It felt as if the universe itself was watching, waiting. Suddenly, the sensors pinged. "There," Clara shouted, pointing at the screen. A faint ripple in space, almost invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable. The enemy was there, and they were moving. "Shields up, all weapons ready," Ross commanded. His voice cut through the tension on the bridge like a knife. "We engage as soon as they show themselves." A low rumble reverberated through the ship as the Sovereign's shields powered up. The entire fleet followed suit, racing for the confrontation that had been building for days. The unknown enemy had been elusive, but now they were close enough for the first real engagement. And then, without warning, the enemy struck. A barrage of energy blasts slammed into the Sovereign, rattling the entire ship. The crew braced as the shields flared, absorbing the brunt of the attack. Ross felt the jolt through his body, but he didn't flinch. This was what they had been waiting for. "Return fire," Ross ordered, voice calm but commanding. "Fire at will." The Sovereign's weapons systems lit up with a bright flash as it unleashed its payload. The rest of the fleet followed suit, firing on the enemy ships that had materialized from the shadows. But the enemy wasn't done. They moved with startling speed, weaving in and out of the line of fire, using their superior technology to avoid being hit. It was unlike anything Ross had ever seen before. "We're not hitting them," Clara said, her fingers flying over the console as she tried to track the enemy's movements. "Their evasive maneuvers are too fast." Ross's mind raced. They needed to change tactics. The Sovereign's weapons were powerful, but they weren't designed for this kind of fight. The enemy was far more advanced, their ships seeming to disappear and reappear in the blink of an eye. He quickly made a decision. "Activate the EMP cannon. If we can't hit them with conventional weapons, we'll disable their tech and force them into the open." Clara hesitated, glancing at Ross. "Are you sure?" The EMP is risky. It could take out our systems, too. We don't have a choice, Ross said. Do it. The crew worked quickly, rerouting power to the EMP cannon. The weapon hummed to life, its energy gathering in a massive pulse. Ross knew the risks, but he also knew that it was their only shot. With a deafening roar, the EMP cannon fired. A brilliant pulse of energy surged forward, streaking across space toward the enemy fleet. The moment it hit, a wave of interference spread outward, distorting the fabric of space itself. The enemy ships flickered for a moment, their advanced cloaking tech failing for just a split second. Ross's heart skipped a beat. There they were, the enemy ships, their once invisible forms now visible, for just a fraction of a second. But that was all they needed. Take the shot, Ross barked. The Sovereign's weapons unleashed everything they had. Blasts of energy tore through the dark space, striking the enemy ships with unrelenting force. One by one, the enemy vessels were hit, their shields collapsing under the onslaught. But the battle was far from over. More enemy ships emerged from the darkness, their numbers seemingly endless. Clara's voice broke through the chaos. We've done some damage, but they're regrouping. It's not enough. They're coming back stronger. Ross cursed under his breath. The EMP cannon had done its job, but they still had a long way to go before they could claim victory. And the enemy wasn't finished with them yet. The fight had only just begun. The Sovereign shook again as more energy blasts hit, the ship groaning under the assault. Ross gritted his teeth, refusing to let the pressure break him. He had seen humanity fight against the odds before. He had seen them survive when it seemed impossible. And this time would be no different. We're not giving up, Ross said, his voice firm. Clara, coordinate with the fleet. We'll hit them with everything we've got. We're not backing down. Not this time. As Clara worked to coordinate the remaining ships, Ross looked out at the vast expanse of space. He knew the enemy would keep coming, but he also knew one thing for certain. Humanity had never been more dangerous than when cornered. This time, they wouldn't be the prey. They were about to show the enemy what it meant to face an angry humanity. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from over, and humanity would fight to the last. The battle raged on, and the Sovereign held its ground amidst the chaos. The crew worked in perfect synchrony, their focus unbroken, despite the barrage of energy blasts that continued to shake the ship to its core. Ross could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, the knowledge that everything depended on this final stand. If they faltered now, there would be no coming back. Shields at 40%, Clara reported, her voice tense but steady. We're holding, but not for long. The enemy is relentless. Ross's jaw tightened. He could feel the tide of the battle slipping out of their favor. The EMP cannon had bought them precious seconds, but the enemy was recovering quickly, adapting to their tactics with frightening efficiency. They were learning, and if the Sovereign didn't finish them now, humanity might not get another chance. We need to end this now, Ross muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Admiral, Clara said, glancing at the tactical screen. I have an idea. It's risky, but it might just work. Ross looked at her, seeing the same resolve in her eyes that he felt in his own chest. What do you have in mind? We can use the fleet's collective firepower to create a concentrated burst, a focused strike aimed directly at their command ship. If we can disable their leader, the rest of their fleet may fall apart. Ross considered the plan. It was a dangerous move, putting everything on one shot, but it was their only hope. The enemy had proven time and again that their advantage lay in their superior technology, but if they could eliminate the brain behind the operation, the rest would crumble. The problem was that the enemy's command ship was hidden, surrounded by its fleet like a predator guarding its kill. But humanity wasn't afraid to make bold moves, especially when the odds were stacked against them. All right, Ross said, his voice firm with determination. Prepare the fleet for a coordinated strike. We'll focus everything on their command ship. We hit them all at once. No hesitation. The crew sprang into action, working as one, no longer a team of individuals but a single entity, bound by a common purpose. Clara's hands moved over the console, sending the orders out to the rest of the fleet. The comms buzzed with the chatter of other ships preparing for the strike. The time had come. Ross could feel the weight of the decision, but he had no other choice. It was do or die. The Sovereign aligned itself with the rest of the fleet, all ships now in position. The enemy ships, seemingly aware of the upcoming strike, shifted into a defensive formation. They were trying to protect their leader, and Ross couldn't blame them. The command ship was everything. Without it, the enemy would be lost, their fleet scattered, their advantage neutralized. "We're in position," Clara reported, her voice tight with concentration. "On your mark, Admiral." Ross looked out at the vastness of space, his mind flashing back to everything they had endured to get here. The battles, the losses, the suffering, all of it had led to this moment. Humanity's fate, and perhaps the fate of the entire galaxy, now rested in their hands. "Now," Ross ordered. The Sovereign and the rest of the fleet unleashed everything they had, weapons firing in perfect synchrony. A barrage of energy beams lit up the void, creating a brilliant display of power and destruction. The enemy's shields flared under the assault, but they couldn't hold. One by one, their defenses faltered, and the command ship began to crack under the pressure. "Direct hit," Clara shouted. "We've breached their shields." Ross felt a surge of hope, but he knew it wasn't over yet. The enemy's command ship had taken the brunt of the attack, but it wasn't done yet. The enemy commander was still alive, still fighting to regain control. The rest of the fleet would continue their assault until the job was finished. Another volley of fire struck the command ship, this time targeting its engines. The ship's shields collapsed completely, and the once pristine hull now bore the scars of the brutal onslaught. The command ship lurched, then staggered as its engines sputtered and died. For a moment, everything went silent. The space around them seemed to hold its breath. Then, the enemy fleet began to scatter. It was over. The enemy commander, unable to maintain control of the fleet without their flagship, ordered a retreat. The rest of the ships followed suit, retreating into the dark depths of space. But the damage had already been done. The Sovereign had delivered a blow from which they could not recover. Ross sat back in his chair, his body tense with the aftermath of the battle. The adrenaline was fading, but the weight of the moment was still heavy on his shoulders. "We did it," Clara said softly, as if still unable to believe it. But Ross wasn't ready to celebrate. Not yet. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The enemy had underestimated humanity before, and they had paid the price. But Ross knew they would be back. This victory wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. But for now, humanity had proven one undeniable truth. When pushed to the edge, when all hope seemed lost, humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and the universe had just learned that the hard way.